Hi friends, welcome to Azure content. This is part 6 in Azure Data Factory playlist. In this video, we are going to learn more about pipelines and activities. So in part 5, we have already covered what are the key components of Azure Data Factory in brief. So in this video, we will be talking more specifically about pipelines and activities. So let's move ahead. So we already know that pipeline is a logical group of activities that perform a task. So basically, pipeline is the combination of one or more activities together, which performs a meaningful task. And what are the activities? Activities in a pipeline define action to be performed on your data. So a single unit of work is performed by activity, and together if we combine multiple activities, it creates pipeline. And in our previous video, we have seen that activities are of three types, that is data movement activity, data transformation activity, and control flow activity. So in total, we have around 40 activities which can be segregated into these three categories. Now out of these 40 activities, there are few activities which are independent of datasets, which means it can run without having any dataset inside them. For example, wait activity or suppose set variable activity, these kinds of activities does not need any dataset within them in order to perform a certain task. And on the other hand, there are few activities which only consumes dataset. For example, lookup activity, it needs a dataset, but in return, it will not produce any datasets. Okay. So example of such activities are lookup activity or get metadata activity. Now coming to those activities which consumes dataset as well as it produces datasets in return. So example of such kind of activities are copy activity. It consumes input dataset and in return it produces some output dataset, right? So an activity may or may not consume dataset and may or may not produce a dataset. Okay. It depends on which activity you are using. Now, as we discussed, pipeline is the logical group of activities. So we can schedule this pipeline, we can monitor the execution of these pipelines, and we can manage the pipelines as well inside ADF. So let me go to Microsoft documentation where we will talk about these three categories of activities, that is data movement activity, transformation activities, and control flow activities. So first of all, coming to data movement activities, we just have copy activity as a data movement activity. We can also use data flow as a data movement activity, but the main task of data flow is to transform the data. So we are only considering copy data activity as the data movement activity. So you can see these are the data stores that are supported in the copy data activity. So few of them are supported as source as well as sink. Few of them are supported only as source and not as sink, and few of them are supported only as sink and not as source. Okay. So what I mean by that is, for example, if I take any of these data sets. So for example, if I take Teradata, it is supported as source but not as sink. So what it means is, if I go to ADF and if I try to create a new pipeline, suppose I'm dragging a copy data activity. So what we expect is Teradata is supported as source. So in the source dataset, we will be able to create a dataset pointing to Teradata. But since it is not supported in sink, so if I go to sink and if I try to search Teradata, so you can see no results are found, which means Teradata is not supported as sink. So you can get the list of all these supported data stores here. I'll share the link in the description of the video. And there are few data stores which are still in preview. So what it means is, it is not fully mature. And if you have a requirement to use these kinds of connectors which are in preview, then you can contact Azure support and you can provide feedback related to these connectors which are in preview, so that those feedbacks can be taken into consideration before making it as generally available connector. Okay. And these are the list of data transformation activities, and these are for control flow activities. So we will learn each of these activities in details later in upcoming videos. So let me go to ADF portal, and here while creating the pipeline, you will see all these activities here in the activities pane. So all the activities that can be used in a pipeline is present inside this activity pane. So it is called the activity pane. So this is the activity pane of ADF. Now coming to this part, here is where we will be creating our pipeline. Okay, so this is the editor pane. Okay, so this is called the editor canvas or editor pane. So this is editor canvas. Now coming to this part, this is called the configuration pane. Okay, so this is called configuration pane, where we will be defining the pipeline parameters and variables inside the pipeline, and we can also set the concurrency of the pipeline. We will talk about it in details, and we can see the pipeline execution in the output tab. Okay, so this is called the configuration pane of the pipeline. Now coming to this part, this is called the property pane of ADF. Okay, so this is where we have to define all the properties related to a pipeline. So this is called properties pane. Okay, so here we have to define the pipeline name and description of the pipeline. This is optional, and here we can also add tag to the pipeline, which is also called annotation, which is helpful in monitoring the pipelines. Okay, so in this panel we have to define the properties related to the pipeline. So these are the 4 sections that will be helpful in creating a pipeline completely. Okay, so from activity pane we can see which activity is useful for creating the pipeline. We can drag those activities in this editor canvas, and we can combine those activities with the help of activity dependency, or which is also called conditional path. We will talk about it later. And in this configuration pane, we can create pipeline parameters, we can create variables, and we can apply settings related to concurrency of the pipeline in settings option, and we can see the pipeline execution in output tab. Okay, and in properties, we have to define the pipeline name, and we can give description to the pipeline according to the requirement, and we can add annotations in the pipeline that will be helpful for monitoring the pipeline. Okay, and in this related tab, let me show you. In related tab, we will be able to see all the resources that the pipeline is dependent on. So for example, if I open any of the pipelines, so you can see this pipeline is related to another master pipeline. So master pipeline is calling this inner pipeline, so we are able to see that this pipeline is related to other pipeline. Okay, now let me go back to the presentation. So let's move ahead. So these are the pipeline properties. So when we specify the name of the pipeline, it should not be more than 140 characters. Okay, so let me show you the same practically. So if I try to give name to the pipeline that is more than 140 characters, so let me copy this whole sentence and let me try to paste it here in the pipeline name. Okay, so you can see it is giving error saying pipeline name should start and end with letters, numbers and underscore. So as you can see, we have a dot here. So if I remove it, so that error is gone, and it says pipeline name has exceeded the limit of 140 characters. Okay, so we can give pipeline name only up to 140 characters. Okay, so this is the required field, which means it is mandatory field to add a pipeline name. We cannot skip this. So every pipeline should have a name associated with it, and that name should be unique. Okay, and as we discussed, a pipeline can only contain letter, number and underscore. Okay, it cannot contain these special characters. It can also contain space, but special characters are not allowed. Okay, so we are good here. And coming to description, description specifies the text describing what pipeline is used for. So this field is optional, it is not mandatory, but if you want to have a clarification about what this pipeline does, then you can use this description field to describe it. So suppose I'm giving this pipeline name as pl underscore copy data. Okay, and in description we can say copy data from delimited text to SQL table. Okay, so these kinds of meaningful description we can give to the pipeline, so that if we are working as a development team and I am creating one pipeline, and the other fellow members will also be able to know what this pipeline does. So basically, description adds more meaning to the pipeline, but it is not mandatory to use. It is just helpful when you're working with a collaboration of other people so that you can know what this pipeline does exactly. So now if you see, there is a bracket symbol here, which is nothing but JSON code of this pipeline. Okay, so you can see all the pipeline properties are defined here in this JSON. Okay. So it has all the details regarding the pipeline. For example, name of the pipeline, properties, which has description, and then activities which are there in the pipeline. Okay. So activities section can have one or more activities defined within it, and it is of array type. Okay. And it is required field. So here in this pipeline, we have just one copy activity. So you can see in this activity array, we have copy data activity, and all of the activity parameters are present here. Okay, what is the timeout and what is the retry value? So all these are activity properties. Okay, so you can see inside this type properties, it contains data related to source dataset. So you can see we have select query. Also, if I close this and if I go to copy activity and if I go to source, you can see we have the query present here, which is select top 10 start from control metadata, which is the same query which is present here. Okay, so it contains all the information related to the activities present in the pipeline, and what are the data sets present in those activities, and what are the configuration of those data sets. Okay, so you can see sync is delimited text type. Okay, so all these values, all these properties are present in the pipeline JSON. So you can see parameters related to the pipeline are also present here. So we have two parameters, that is schema name and table name. So you can see we have these two parameters present here. Okay, so let me go to presentation. So it also holds parameter section, which can have one or more parameters defined within the pipeline, making your pipeline flexible for reuse. Okay, but parameter is not mandatory field, and the data type of parameter is list. Now coming to concurrency, so the pipeline JSON also contains the information related to the maximum number of concurrent runs the pipeline can have. So we can configure concurrency here in the pipeline settings. So you can see we have the option to define concurrency of this pipeline. So what this concurrency means is, suppose we have 10 triggers that is executing this pipeline at the same time, and we have defined concurrency as 5, then at one particular time only 5 instances of this pipeline will be running and the other 5 will be present in the queue. So this is the upper limit or the maximum limit of pipeline execution that we can have at one point of time. Okay, so once the execution of 5 pipelines is completed, then the next set of 5 pipelines will be triggered. So we can define the concurrency here in the settings, and that will be reflected in the this pipeline JSON as well. Okay, now we have annotations as well. Annotation is nothing but the tag associated with the pipeline. Okay, so we can have a hard-coded annotation here, or we can parameterize this. And once we trigger this pipeline, you can see the annotation in this annotation tab. Okay, in the pipeline monitoring. Okay, but you cannot see annotation when you debug the pipeline. So in the debug monitoring part, we do not have anything called annotation. Only when you trigger the pipeline, you can see this annotation or the tag associated with the pipeline. So to know more about annotations, you can take a look at part 15 of the real-time scenarios playlist of ADF in my channel. So this was about pipeline properties. Similarly, we have activity JSON as well. If I go to the pipeline, once I click on this copy data, you can see we have this bracket symbol here as well in the activity, which defines the activity JSON, and it contains all the properties related to this activity. Okay, so it contains the name of the activity. The maximum number of characters for the name of activities is 55. So if we try to provide more than 55 characters here, so suppose, let me copy this and let me provide it here. So you can see it says activity name exceeds the limit of 55 characters, and it should not have any symbols other than letters, numbers, and underscore and dash. Okay, and you can also describe an activity by providing description here in the description box. Okay, so we can make use of this description field to describe what the activity does. Okay, now coming to type, so it describes which type of activity it is. So basically we have three types of activities, which are data movement activity, data transformation activity, and control activities. Okay, we have already talked about it. And then the activity JSON also contains the linked service name. So it depends on the type of activities that we are using. So there are few activities which directly consume linked service instead of dataset. For example, SD Insight activity, stored procedure activity. For these activities, we have to provide the linked service directly into the activity. Okay, and it is not mandatory for other activities to provide linked service name. So if I drag stored procedure activity here, let me try to do that. So you can see in the settings, we have to provide linked service name inside the activity itself. Okay, and if I go to this activity JSON, you can see linked service name is being referred here. Okay, but if I go to copy data activity JSON, you can see linked service is not present inside this activity JSON. Okay, it only contains the data related to dataset, and for few activities even dataset is also not required. For example, suppose wait activity, it does not need any input. So if I go to JSON, so you can see all those properties are missing here. Okay, related to dataset and linked service. Okay, so linked service properties only holds good for these kinds of activities. Other than that, it is not mandatory. Now coming to type properties. So properties in this type property section depends on each type of activity. Okay, so suppose inside wait activity, this type property is holding only property called wait time in seconds. Okay, so whatever settings we have in this particular activity, it will be reflected in this type properties. And if I go to copy data activity and if I scroll down, so you can see in this type properties, it holds data related to source and sink settings. Okay, so it depends on the type of activity, what type property will hold. Okay. Now coming to policy, the policy section affects the runtime behavior of the activity. So it includes timeout and retry behavior. If we do not specify timeout and retry specifically, then it will take the default values. So let me go back. So here in the general tab itself, we have the option to define the timeout of the activity, and also we have the option to define the retry. So all these settings related to timeout and retry are present inside policy section of this JSON. Okay, we don't need to remember these things. I'm just showing you an overview related to activities and pipelines. Okay. Now this depends on property. It defines the activity dependencies. Okay, which means how does the next activity is connected to the previous activity? Is it connected with success path or failure path? So these things are defined under depends on properties. So if you see currently this depends on is empty, but if I drag some activity, suppose set variable activity before this copy activity, and if I connect these two with success path, then if I go to this property again, so now you can see this depends on property is having data related to how this activity is connected to the previous activity. So it is connected with succeeded dependency. Okay, if set variable succeeds, then copy activity will run. Okay, so let's talk about that in deep. Let me go to next slide. So activity dependency determines how subsequent activities depends on the previous activity, and it will check whether to execute the next task or not. So basically we have four kinds of dependency conditions. First one is succeeded, then failed, then skipped, and then completed. So if I go to ADF, so you can see there are four conditions on every activities. So we can join or combine two activities with the help of these conditional path. Okay, based on our requirement. Okay, so suppose we have two activities, activity A and B, and activity B has dependency condition on activity A with succeeded, which means suppose activity B is connected with activity A with this success path. Then what happens is activity B will only run if activity A has final status of succeeded. So once this set variable will be succeeded, then it will trigger this copy data activity, which means if this set variable activity fails, then this copy data activity will not be executed at all. Okay. Okay, so now coming to the second point, activity B has dependency condition on activity A with failed. Okay, which means let me remove this, and if I connect this activity with the failed condition, then what will happen is this copy data activity will only run if set variable activity fails. Okay, if this gets succeeded, then copy data activity will not be called at all. Okay, so so activity B will only run if activity A has final status of failed. Okay. Now coming to third point, activity B has dependency condition on A with completed. Okay, so if I don't use this one and if I use this completed conditional path, then what happens is if set variable will either succeed or fail in any of the condition, this copy activity will run. Okay, so activity B will run if activity A has final status of succeeded or failed. In both the condition, success or fail, this copy data will execute. Okay, so we will see examples of using these paths later in upcoming videos. Okay, now coming to fourth point, activity B has dependency condition on activity A with skipped. So suppose we are combining these two activities with this on skip conditional path, then only if set variable gets skipped, this copy data activity will run. So an example of this is, suppose there are three activities X, Y and Z. Okay, so suppose I'm going to use one more activity, suppose lookup activity, and this lookup will be connected to set variable like this. Okay, so what happens is if lookup fails, then this set variable will be skipped, right? If lookup is succeeded, then it will call set variable. But if this lookup is failed, then it is not going to trigger set variable. So this set variable will be skipped and it will automatically call this copy data activity. Which means if lookup succeeds, then copy data activity won't be called. If lookup fails, then set variable will be skipped and copy data will be called. Okay. So this is what this example talks about. Okay, so now I want to show you a small thing. So whenever we create pipeline, we can either directly create it within this space by clicking on this new pipeline option, or we can create a new folder, and within this new folder, we can create a pipeline. Okay, so in this new folder, currently we don't have anything, but if we create a pipeline, so it will be coming under this new folder. Okay, and I can also move this pipeline by clicking on this move item, and we can choose any of the folders present to move this pipeline. Okay, so now you can see we have two pipelines under this new folder. We can also clone this pipeline by clicking on this clone option. So what it does is it will create a copy of this pipeline and it will give the name as the previous pipeline name underscore copy1. Now there is another way to clone a pipeline. What we can do is, let me go to this inner pipeline and let me go to this JSON option and let me copy this entire JSON, and now let me create a new pipeline. So by default it has given the pipeline name as pipeline 25, and now if I open this JSON, let me try to delete this and let me copy the previous JSON that we copied from inner pipeline. Now if I click on OK, it gives me the error saying rename is not allowed from the JSON editor. Okay, so earlier our pipeline name was pipeline 25. So I need to provide the same name here. So let me give pipeline 25 here, and now let me click on OK. So now you can see we have cloned this inner pipeline with this pipeline 25. Okay, it has the same activities that is present in inner pipeline. Now if I want to change the name, suppose I want to change the name to inner pipeline 2, then I can do it in this general properties. Okay, we cannot do it in the JSON itself. Okay, also if I want to copy this entire pipeline from one ADF to another ADF, suppose this is my dev environment and I want to manually copy it to test, then what I can do is I can download a support file. This will create a zip file which contains all the pipeline related information. Okay, so you can see linked service JSON is there, and then pipeline JSON is there. So if I open this pipeline JSON, it will contain all the information including linked service, dataset, everything is there. Okay, so I can directly copy this and create a new pipeline in test, or I can upload it in the Git repository. We will talk about everything in details in upcoming videos. Okay. So this was just the overview of pipelines and activities. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you like the content. Please hit on like button and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done it yet. Thank you.